in the chapter in the topic of presentations. Am I right? Am I audible?
Yes, ma'am.
Yes. Good evening, Nidhi. Yeah, so as I was saying, where are we in the workshop right now? What did we discuss in the last two sessions? I think we are still at presentations, but exactly in presentations, where are we? How many of you were in at least one of the sessions prior to this session? How many of you were in at least one of the sessions prior to this session? Great, Nidhi. Could you tell us a little bit about what happened in that session? So why is the attendance a little low today? Is there any specific reason? Is there a class that's clashing? I can't hear any of you speak. Can somebody?
Hello, am I audible, ma'am?
Yes, Miss Joseph.
Yeah, English class was going in parallel, ma'am.
English class? Could you say that again, Miss Joseph? All right, I can see people are still joining. Maybe there's a class that just got over. That's all right. Perhaps we'll take 2 more minutes to see if everyone's on board and on the same page. All right, does that work? Can I have a few thumbs up if that works? Perfect, great. So there's a Python class going on, is it?
No, ma'am, it's a workshop.
Python workshop.
Yes, ma'am. There is a class of AI, importance of AI and ML.
Okay, that's happening right now. We have an industry session by Walmart going on at this time. Let me get back to you and see if this can be rescheduled. Otherwise, we will go on with how many other students we have in this session. All right. Also, can I have a quick show of hands of how people who were in at least one of the previous sessions? A quick show of hands of people who were at least in one of the previous sessions. Okay, great. That's a lot of us. So let's go ahead as planned. If somebody feels like they've missed out on this, they can always refer to the video. Great. All right. Lehani Raj Mohanta, would you be able to tell us a little bit about what happened in the last session? Where did we end?
I only attended the first week's first lecture. I didn't attend the second lecture.
Yeah, tell us about the second lecture.
No, I didn't attend the second lecture. I just attended the first lecture,
The
which
first
was
one.
about the presentations.
Strategies. Okay. Okay.
So in there we learned about the basics of presentations, like what are the contents-based delivery,
Mhm.
and then some strategies about how we can different strategies to perform, like the prep method and I can't recall all of them.
All right. All right. Doesn't matter. So let me just share my screen and we can just go straight into the second part, which is about the slides. I think this is where we stopped last time. We briefly touched upon the different kinds of slides that you can have in your slide deck. And then we also looked at some of the resources that one can, just give me a minute. I can share this, right? Great. So we looked at some of the slide making resources on the internet that you can use to be creative with your templates. So do any of you have any suggestions to this list that I've made here? This is a list of resources I used as an undergraduate student and that have been very, very handy. And I'm wondering if you have any other new resources that you want to add. Yes, Nidhi. Right? So Prezi is a very, very useful resource, very creative. Then you have slidesco.com, which gives you quite good templates for free. You can always use Google Slides. Google Slides is one of the best free options out there for you to tinker around with your slide design. And yes, there's Canva for presentations too, as Dripto says. Canva is again slightly more difficult to work with in terms of presentations, but definitely a space for you to explore, tinker around, and see what works for you the best, right? Or you could always simply opt for Microsoft PowerPoint. It is simple, effective, and once you get the hang of it, it's just very, very easy. You don't really need to spend so much time crafting a presentation, right? And that's the point I tried to make in the previous session, which is you don't have to be a great designer to design impactful slides. All that matters is that your slide is functional and effective. It doesn't matter how aesthetic or beautiful or creative it is, right? Great. So for images and formatting, in terms of the images that you're going to use in your slides, generally it is advisable that you use it only from Creative Commons. Does anybody know what Creative Commons is about? Anyone? Have you heard of Creative Commons? Yes or no? Raise show of hands. Yes. Lakshmi Nandan says yes. Can you tell us a little bit more about it?
Yeah, images which don't have any copyright.
Right. So Creative Commons branded images are images that don't have any copyright, are images that you can use, that you can straight up take from the internet and use for personal and academic purposes without breaching any sort of copyright. So always, if you're using images, try to use them from Creative Commons. Don't just copy any random image that is there on the internet and use it in your presentation. That is not good academic or professional practice, right? However, if you feel like you need to use an image from the internet that is licensed or copyrighted, or that somebody else owns, somebody else has uh, licensed it, then you can still use it, but you always need to cite where you took that image from, right? You always need to cite the source of that image, that you've taken it from so and so website and that it belongs to so and so author, photographer, or owner, or a company that holds the copyright to that image, right? So, point number one, as much as possible, use only from Creative Commons or your own personal images. If you feel the need to use something that is copyrighted or licensed, please use it, but always cite the source of that photograph. Right? The second point is use graphics and smart art. Right? Uh, Graphics and smart art are one of the best ways for you to be able to visualize any data that you have in your presentation, and uh, also just to make your slide deck a little bit more visual than text heavy. Of course, this depends on the topic of your presentation. If your topic does not really require a lot of visual representation of data, then that's okay. You can still use text. But if there is data that needs to be tabulated or visualized, then always go for graphics and smart art and graphs. Third point, use the same font combination across all slides. Generally, designers suggest that you uh, have the headings in serif and the body in sans serif, or the other way around, right? The body in sans serif and the headings in sans serif and the body in serif, right? So, what is a sans serif font? Does anybody know what that means? Show of hands, please. Yes, Mr. Lakshminandan. Would you like to
Sound
talk about it?
does not have the thing on the sides.
Right? It does not have that thing at the end of the letter, right? Correct, you're correct. Sans serif font is a more modern font. It is a more neutral font, and it does not have those chiseled endings. Like each letter in the font uh, does not have that chiseled ending, right? As a result, it looks a lot cleaner. Whereas a serif font has those ends, those little uh, protrusions at the end of every letter, and that is what makes it a little bit more old timey, a little bit more formal, a little bit more professional. Right now, these are the meanings that we've attributed uh, to these design styles. Right. So generally, what is suggested is that you use a combination of sans serif and serif for headings and body, respectively. Right. Of course, it is up to you if you use sans serif throughout the presentation, use serif throughout the presentation. That is also all right, as long as your slide deck is not text heavy and you're not using a font that is completely illegible or does not suit the occasion. Right? For instance, try not to use fonts that look too informal, like Comic Sans. Comic Sans is that font. How many of you know what Comic Sans is? Can you perhaps link a picture to Comic Sans? What is the Comic Sans font? Anyone? Right? It's a font that is handwritten, that looks like it's handwritten, right? Like it's used in comics. Uh, it's used in comic books that are meant for children or meant for even adults, but generally it's used in a more informal sense. Now, if you use Comic Sans to make your thesis defense presentation, well, it can be used in an ironic manner that way. But if you want to be a little straightforward, then try not to use fonts that look too informal. The fourth point, do not splash your slides with too many different colors, right? Again, as it is with the font combination, generally do not go beyond 2 colors per slide. Use only 2 colors per slide, right? And one of them can be a very plain background color like gray or a very light yellow or a very light blue. And the other two colors can be black for text and one other color just to spice it up a little bit, right? But otherwise, do not use too many colors in your slides. Do you all agree? Do you agree with the idea that too many colors in slides do not really have the desired effect? Does anyone want to talk about a time when they used uh, too many colors in their slides or have seen somebody use it and it did not really work out very well? No, that's all right. Okay, now there's this final point that I want to invite you to think about and to really take away from this session, which is to spend some extra time formatting tables and cleaning up text, right? Formatting tables will not take you more than 5 extra minutes on your overall presentation, but it will completely make over your presentation and have uh, and make it at least 50% better if you format it the right way. Right? So let's see an example of how formatting is a huge important part of the presentation. Take a look at the table on the left side and take a look at the table on the right. What's the difference? Can I have a few responses? Color scheme, okay. Uniform row size, okay. Interchanges color rows, okay. What else? Which one works better? Which table works better?
The second one.
Second one, yes. Why? Conclusion, okay. There is no conclusion. What do you mean by conclusion, Ashutosh? It is sorted with respect to number of months, right? So there is an order to it, right? Then what else?
Ma'am, at last, in the last of the second table, there is a conclusion, right? It is a conclusion. I don't know about it. I think it is a conclusion. I thought that. So I said,
No. Oh, that 24 units heavy truck sales,
okay.
right? That's just a note, an important note that cannot really be gleaned from the data. But in terms of conclusion, you can see that the row in total, the row that shows the total, is very clearly highlighted and it gives the figures in bold and it gives figures in a rounded off manner, which makes it easier for the reader to read. Right? The moment you look at the second table, you feel like, okay, I can understand something from it. But whereas if you look at the first table for the first time as a reader or as a member of the audience, you would immediately be put off. You would immediately think, oh, really, I don't really want to read this. I don't understand. It's a lot of numbers, right? So the second table reduces those barriers and invites the audience to read and interpret the table in a smoother, easier, more seamless manner. Okay, is that clear? Great. So what is happening here? Just a little bit of formatting, right? It did not take so much work to convert the first table to the second table. It really does not take a lot of work, right? It just takes a little bit of work and a little bit of patience. And once that is done, your table has been made over completely and looks completely different and it looks entirely more readable, right? So please, please, please take the time to format your tables and text and everything else. It will totally be worth it. Great. Let's move on to a little bit about to talk a little bit about what the difference between serif and sans serif is, and I wanted to show you visually how they are different. You can look at the first word, dancy. Can you see those little things at the end of every letter? Yes or no?
Yes, ma'am.
Right? So those little things, those little protrusions, those little chisels are what differentiate a serif font from a sans serif font, right? So can somebody give me an example of a serif font, a font that we commonly use in all our assignments, essays, papers, whatever? As an undergraduate student, you will definitely have used that. Right? Times New Roman, absolutely. Right? A serif font that is most commonly used is Times New Roman. Times New Roman 12-point size is the standard for all academic work or professional work. Sans serif font is generally a little bit more casual, but it's also being used in formal situations these days. Right? So for your sort of information, we can see clearly what the difference between serif and sans serif fonts are. Serifs are intended for a long sequence of words that exceed one line, right? So that's generally the body of your presentation or where there's a lot of text going on. They have little feet that guide the letters into each other so the letters appear connected and help the eye stay within the line of text in dense copy. Serifs possess varying line weights that help the eye identify the letter quickly. Right? So that's the philosophy or the logic behind serif fonts. Some of the most common serif fonts that we use in our daily life are Georgia, which has a personality of formality, practicality, whereas Times New Roman is the traditional font. It's the font that we've always been using. It is the font that looks professional. Right? There are some other sans serif fonts. The word sans means without, right? How do you use the word sans in your daily life? What meaning does it have?
Without.
Without, right? Sans sugar, coffee sans sugar, which basically means coffee without sugar. So sans serif means without those little feet, without those little chisels at the end of the letter, right? So that means it's plain. The letter forms are bigger and bolder, and sans serif typefaces are used in children's books because they're simpler to read, right? But some believe that they're more difficult to read. I personally think that they're simpler to read. But in general, designer's choice is to go for serif in the body and sans serif in the headings. Okay? Some of the examples of sans serif fonts are Arial, which is considered to be, the neutral font, the font that you use as soon as you open Microsoft Word, right? As soon as you open Microsoft Word, what is the font you see that you type in?
Ma'am, Calibri.
Calibri. All right. Google Docs. Anyone uses Google Docs?
Arial.
Right? Google Docs, the font that you use is generally Arial. Calibri again is another. Is it sans serif or serif? What about Calibri?
Serif.
Calibri. Does it have the little feet at the end of each letter? Why say silence suddenly? Is Calibri sans serif or serif?
Sans serif, right? The new generation of Arial.
Yes, Calibri is sans serif. It does not have the little feet at the end of it, so it's not serif font. And again, it's sort of a neutral font that does not have any very strong personality of its own. Of course, these are sort of subjective opinions. Different fonts can mean different things to different people, but largely Arial and Calibri are considered to be, sort of neutral, stable, conformist. Great. So that's about formatting, and that's a little bit about sans serif and serif fonts. But in general, here are 3 pointers that, again, I would really emphasize and I would really impress upon you. First thing is to not rely on your slides too much. While we did begin the presentation session by talking about how it is very, very important to have good visual accompaniments, ultimately, slides are one bit lower than your content, right? They do not come top of the hierarchy. Your content should be what is the most important part of Akash says, ma'am, how would we recognize the personality of a font? Again, as I said, it's a very subjective sort of opinion, but generally you can look at books on typography or books and articles on formatting and fonts, and you can go down that rabbit hole of what good typography is, and you can perhaps get to know a little bit about that. In fact, I have a book to suggest if anyone's interested in that. Let me quickly pull it up. Typography. Yeah, this one. You can just take a look at it when you're free. I thought it was very, very interesting. It's called Just My Type by Simon Garfield. Right? Great. Let me go back to the original slides. So don't rely on your slides too much. Even if you have to even if there's no time and you have to compromise on one thing, then compromise on the slides, but don't compromise on your content. Right? So it's that point. Ideally, you would not compromise on both of these things. But if you had to prioritize the content. So don't rely on your slides too much. Your slides are only an accompaniment. They are only an extra crutch that you use to make your presentation more easy to handle. Right? Is that clear? Show of hands. Great, great. The second point is again an obvious point, but a point that I want to emphasize nevertheless, which is to not dump too much data or text on your slides. Most of you already know this, but in the last minute, we have this tendency to dump as much text as possible because we don't take the time to format, right? But as much as possible, please do not dump too much data or text on your slides. It makes it harder not only for your audience, but also for yourself, because you will be standing there trying to say something and then you'll realize there's so much text on the slide that you haven't covered, and ultimately it will go to this point where you start reading off the slide and you lose the connect with your audience, which is detrimental to the quality of your presentation, right? So please do not dump too much data or text on your slides. Third point is do customize your slides and speech based on your audience's profile, right? um, your audience profile might be a group of people who are experts in the field that you're talking about and already know a lot of background knowledge. So ideally, you would not spend the time talking about those background knowledge or background terms or concepts before getting into the crux of your presentation or the juiciest parts of your presentation, right? So if you're talking to a team of experts, cut out the background stuff, get straight to the point. On the other hand, perhaps you've been invited to talk about, say, thermodynamics to 7th standard students or 8th standard students. In that case, you would have to break down every small concept because they're not at that level, right? You would have to break down every small concept and focus on the basics rather than focusing on uh, the advanced concepts. So in that case, you should also know how to reduce the scope of your presentation and talk about a few things, but talk about them in detail because you're talking to an audience that is not specialized, right? So customize your speech and your slides. And how do you customize your slides in terms of the overall feel, the colors, the color combination, what kind of language you use on the slide? All of these have to cater ultimately to the audience you're talking to, right? Is that clear? Okay, I'm going to take the silence as a yes, and we can move on. Now we finally come to the third part of presenting effectively, right? Here, let me refresh your memories. How many of you remember what the elements of a good presentation are? Can I see some of you talk about it? What are the three elements of a good presentation? In the first class, we discussed that there are three elements,
Slides, contents.
right? Great. Slides, content, and delivery. Right now, let me signpost that we are at the delivery part of the presentation, right? Your script and the slides are ready. How will you deliver it? Being calm, composed, and confident does the trick, although it is definitely easier said than done. Okay. Before we get into delivery as such, let me ask you about your presentation experiences and what are the issues you struggle with, especially when it comes to the delivery part of it, right? What is it with about delivery? What are the obstacles that you face when it comes to delivery? Any responses? You can drop them on the chat box or speak up. You forget what you need to say, right? Or you hesitate, or you have stage fear, right? Or if you lack of confidence, speaking coherently. Sometimes you might be so well prepared, but still, once you get on the stage, you start speaking too fast, correct? And you don't really know what's happening to you. Sometimes your knees might wobble out of field, right? So all of these things are very, very common issues that one faces when actually doing the delivery of the presentation. Preparing for the presentation, reading up, scripting your presentation, having the best slides, all of this is one part of the process. But the actual delivery is another whole challenge in itself. We'll take a look at a few strategies that uh, keeping the audience engaged in the sense that the intended message reaches them. Right? Sometimes, no matter how well you're doing your presentation, that connect with the audience just seems lacking. Right? How do you keep up your engagement despite that resistance from the audience? All of these are important parts of knowing how to deliver a presentation. Right? Ultimately, let me give you a short answer and then we'll go into the long answer. The key to doing a good delivery is practice. Right? Practice is the one answer to all of these problems that we go through. And good practice comes with you taking up opportunities as they come along. Right? The moment you see that there's an opportunity for you to get on stage and speak to people, if you take it up, then that's again a platform for you to hone your delivery skills. Right? So, short answer, practice and practicing a lot, which will definitely make you better at delivery. But then there are also some sort of pointers that we can think about, break down, and really use in a day-to-day basis that can help us deliver our content better. Okay, let's look at it. So pre-presentation, you've done all your scripting, you've done your slides. Just before the presentation, what can you do to reduce the nerves and to ensure that your delivery goes well? Firstly, rehearse, right? Cannot emphasize the importance of this enough. Definitely rehearse your presentation with a friend, to a mirror, or even to your pet. It doesn't matter if the other person is responding to you or not. It just matters that you talk to an audience. And once you talk, once you see whether the flow of your script is coming out well, whether the presentation is actually coming out the way you intended to, you will realize what the weak points are. And you will find out and you will immediately be able to solve them prior to the presentation. You won't be taken by surprise during the actual presentation. So rehearsal is absolutely important. Even if you're a seasoned professional, rehearsals is absolutely. Even the most accomplished singers, for instance, they always uh, do a rehearsal before a live show. So that goes, the same pointer goes for orators and speakers as well. Definitely, you have to rehearse. Another point, very, very important point, is to check whether the slides and the script are in sync. Sometimes you change up your script at the last minute, or you change up the slides at the last minute, and one topic goes before the other topic. And suddenly you go to the stage and you see that there's some other slide that is being shown, but the script says something else. And you get flustered and things don't go so well, right? All of this can be avoided if just before the presentation, you can check whether the slides in the script are in sync, whether when you flip to the third slide, whatever content is there on the third slide is what reflects in the script that you have as well. Have your script and outline with you and use it. Don't hesitate to use it if necessary. A point that I've already made in the previous sessions, but in general, people think that it is not good to have a script and that it looks like you're copying or not original enough. But definitely, it's okay to have a script and to refer to the script time and again, as long as you're not reading out of the script. If necessary, it is completely okay to use your script, to refer to the notes. Point number 4, go early. If it's on Zoom, figure out the technical stuff well in advance. Going early makes so much of a difference to how you perform. So let me give you an example of stand-up comedians. How many of you know some of the famous stand-up comedians in our country? Any examples? What stand-up comedians do you watch? Akash Gupta. What most of these people do when they have like a live show or a crowd work show, they reach the stage at least half a day in advance. Kenny Sebastian, for instance, they reach the stage at least half a day in advance and figure out exactly what works for them on the stage, exactly where they can position themselves on the stage and just soak in the feeling of that stage so that they can, it doesn't feel completely new when they're actually presenting, right? Presenting or speaking or doing stand-up comedy. So going early makes so much of a difference just so you can acclimatize yourself to the environment. New environment, always you need to take some time to acclimatize yourself. And so going early is one of the ways to do that. Know where the cameras or audience will be. If you're doing this live, then you should be able to look at both the cameras and also engage with the audience. So, pan around and talk to everybody in the audience so that some part of the audience doesn't feel left out. Right? Again, if this thing is on Zoom, if the presentation is on Zoom, then it doesn't really affect you in a very if it's a live presentation, then you need to know where the cameras will be or where the audience will be so you can engage with them in a physical sense. If it's a recording, say like the recording that people who work for TV do, maybe they're recording the news, then you have to look straight into the camera. You can't really look around. So depending on the media that you're working with and depending on the situation, position yourself well enough and look at the right place so that the desired outcome is good. Dress well. What you wear makes a ton of difference to how you dress. Even if it's on Zoom, please dress well because a lot of mishaps happen when you what you wear makes a ton of difference. If you were going to a conference that is a business kind of conference, then dress in business casual or business formal, depending on how formal that conference is. If a conference, on the other hand, is not necessarily very formal, and you go there overdressed, then you're going to feel out of place. Depending on how the vibe of the place is, you can figure out your dressing sense accordingly. But dress well and well enough in a manner that fits in with the stage you're going to present. Breathe, be calm, speak slowly and clearly. Again, something that a lot of people face when you're actually delivering is that you start speaking too fast. Am I right? How many of you have felt the pace of their speech going too fast during a presentation? Have you ever spoken too fast during a presentation or during sometime maybe when you were anchoring or comparing? Yes? Lakshmi and then we want to elaborate. Akash. What happens? Why do you think that happens?
Yeah, so like one time I interviewed for my internship, and the time he asked me to tell me something about myself, and I I just I think I just lost the line, and I was just talking a lot of things that I think that is not necessary, and yeah, yeah.
So you talk about a lot of things that are not necessary and you also talk too fast. Right?
Yeah.
You're a little nervous and nervousness brings out this sort of flight or fight rush. And you start speaking so fast to salvage the situation. But in those cases, again, this comes with practice and with a lot of self-control. The idea is that you, regardless of how pressurizes the situation is, speaking slowly and clearly and breathing and being calm. Again, a very tricky thing to master, but definitely something that is worth mastering, right? Speaking slowly, regardless of how stressful the situation is. Great. Wrap up within time. Do not extend your speech. If your speech is meant for 15 minutes, then finish up within 15 minutes. Do not extend it too long because people sleep in conferences as it is. People are so bored. You don't want to bore them for longer by extending your speech. Even if you have the most amazing content, as soon as they look at the time and realize that it is over, nobody's going to be interested in your content. So the key here is to be able to fit in all your juiciest content into those 15 minutes and make a short presentation, but a very impactful presentation that is very, very engaging. Right? Please do not extend your speech. Some of the tips that we can use for the opening and conclusion. Right? How can you make your content engaging for an audience that is, that is going through 2 or 3 days of the same thing and they're already bored in this conference, or your classmates have already listened to 3 other presentations and they're very, very bored now. So how can you make your presentation interesting regardless of these other obstacles that the audience might be facing? For that, in the opening, you can ask a rhetorical question. What is a rhetorical question? Anyone? What is a rhetorical question? Anyone? What is a rhetorical question? You are making my question rhetorical by not answering it. Okay, let me answer it for you. A rhetorical question is something that looks like a question but does not necessarily ask for a response. Right? For instance, suppose your friend asks you, your friend tells you, "Hey Shruti, let's have breakfast. Let's have breakfast outside today." And then I respond, "Sure, why not?" Right? Sure, why not? What does the why not mean here? Does it ask for an answer?
No.
Does it ask for an answer? No, right? It is just used to emphasize the fact that I am enthusiastic about going out, right? It has an emphatic effect. It does not have any characteristic of a question in itself. Instead of saying sure, I say sure, why not? Which just gives a little bit more emphasis. Let me give you another example of a rhetorical question. So, for instance, you might have seen this in your science textbooks in school. Did you know that 6 out of 10 people die of diabetes every year? Sorry, did you know that 6 out of 10 people suffer from diabetes in India? I don't know if that's true, but I'm just making the data up. But is it a question? Did you know that 6 out of 10 people in India suffer from diabetes?
No, ma'am. It's look like a question, but it's a fact. Like,
Right? It looks like a question, but it's a fact. Right? It is a rhetorical question. It is used for emphasis.
Is it why is it not a question? I mean, in this question, he just clearly asking if you know that. So yeah, it's a question that if I know or not.
It is definitely a question, Akash, but it is not a question in the sense that what is your name? And you would give me an answer, right? Or do you want to grab a cup of tea? Then you would say yes or no, right? But in these situations, why not? Did you know this? It's not explicitly asking you for an answer. It is just stating a fact in a more emphatic way. And that is the objective of using a rhetorical question. And it's a very good tool that you can use in presentation and public speaking kind of situations. Because you're talking to an audience from whom you don't necessarily want different responses, but you just want them to think the way you are thinking, right? So when you say, did you know that 6 out of 10 people, maybe you're making a presentation about, maybe you've come up with a cure for diabetes and you're presenting your research. If you do your opening in a way that instead of saying 6 out of 10 people suffer from diabetes every year and it's a very it's a disease that affects the lifestyle of many people, instead of saying that as a statement, saying the same thing in a question form, in a rhetorical question form, invites the audience to think about it a little bit more. It gets the audience to do some work. Correct? Am I clear? Instead of saying 6 out of 10 people suffer from diabetes in India every year, you can say, did you know that 6 out of 10 people suffer from diabetes every year? And it's a disease that affects the lifestyle of many people. That gets the audience to think about it. That's why it's called a rhetorical. So you can use rhetorical questions to sort of open your presentation. You can use attention grabbing facts. Of course, if the fact is attention grabbing enough, you can just state the fact. Or you can tell a short story or an anecdote. What is an anecdote? What is an anecdote? An anecdote is generally short stories to make a point, and in specific, short stories that are derived from somebody's personal life. It can be your personal life or somebody else you know. Generally, an experience that you have gone through that is very human in nature, which is why it is generally used to make a point. Right? So it's an experience that you have gone through, or a friend has gone through, or somebody that is human has gone through. That is why it's called an anecdote. Or if you're speaking to a fairly specialized audience that will be interested in your presentation no matter what, then you can straight up state the purpose and outline of the presentation and start off your presentation. Right? That's how you can think about how to open your presentation in different ways. Coming to the conclusion of the presentation, you can summarize the main points, restate, three main points that you want to make from this presentation in the conclusion slide, so that even if the audience has missed out on the entire presentation, they'll be able to take the core ideas away from your conclusion part. Call for action. If you're launching a product, then you can ask your audience to fill up a form and sign up for the product. Or if you've done some research and you want more participants for the study, then you can ask your audience to sign up to be participants for that study. Or if you've just taught somebody a few concepts and you want to test them on those concepts, then you can have a Kahoot quiz, right? So towards the end of your presentation, just take 1 or 2 minutes, use the 1 or 2 minutes to get the audience to do something, right? Once they act on something, then your presentation will have had a bit more impact than just leaving them with tons of information. Okay. Akash, autobiography is not an anecdote. Autobiography is a long documentation of your personal life written in the first person perspective. An anecdote, on the other hand, is a very small incident in your life that has nevertheless affected you and influenced you in a very impactful manner, in a very intense manner. Right? So, and you use that story, you use that anecdote to make a point about something to somebody else. Autobiography is a longer narrative about your life that is also written in the first person. Is that clear? Hope it's clear. Take the silence as a yes. And post presentation, ask for questions. Right? Ask for questions in the question and answer session. Unless you ask, your audience is generally not very enthusiastic to ask and to engage. Right? So if you ask, if you feel like you're open to questions, then they will also sort of think about asking questions. And take your time to process these questions. Right? Sometimes questions might be long-winded, some questions might have 2 or 3 questions, sub-questions embedded in them. So make notes, take your time to process those questions, break them down into chunks, and then address each of those chunks separately. Respond, don't react, right? If there's a question that is provocative, there is a question that is, a slur that is described as a question, even in such provocative situations, respond to it in the most dignified manner possible instead of reacting to it immediately. If you don't know the answer to something, say so. It's completely okay to accept that we do not know certain things about certain topics. And you can just say, I'm afraid I do not have the knowledge on that, enough knowledge to be able to address that question. And I will read up more on it and perhaps we can talk about this over lunch or over email. That is a perfectly acceptable way to answer a question. Right? So as we come to the end of our session on presentations, 3 sessions on presenting effectively, here are 3 main takeaways that I want you all to think about and really take this home with you. First point, preparation is key. Nobody, not even the most accomplished orators, can get away with a lack of preparation. If I hadn't prepared well for this session, I wouldn't be able to talk. Right? So preparation is always key to generally most things in life, but more specifically and especially for things like presentations, where you have to squeeze in a lot of content into a very short period. You don't have to be a great designer to create great slides. You do not have to have the feeling that, oh no, I'm not very aesthetically endowed, so I don't know if I'm good enough to create a good slide. No, that's absolutely not the attitude that one needs to have. You only need where to look. There are tons of templates on the internet. There's tons of ways to create good functional effective slides. And taking the time to format them will really transform the experience of your presentation. And finally, minimalism in both time and design wins. Right? The shorter, the more concise lesser text, lesser images. Everything should be crisp, concise, and to the point. Because crisp and clear presentations always gain a lot more interest than long drawn out. Right? So these are the three main takeaways. If you've not attended any of the sessions prior to this, if you can just take away these 3 points and implement them when you're doing your next presentation, then definitely these sessions would have been worth it. Okay. So that's it for today. Thank you for your patience. We've shot over time by a minute. So if you have any questions, you can ask them. If you don't have any questions, please feel free to leave the session.
Good evening, ma'am.
Yes, Mr. Harsh.
Ma'am, before the session, I want to ask you something for me personally. Ma'am, I never done a speaking thing, neither in English nor in Hindi, nor in front of a small people or in friends. And for me, for personally, my English is not very good. And this presentation that we have to do in our projects is going to be in English, fully in English.
Right.
So here I asking for suggestion or way you can suggest me something so that I can conquer my this mountain like problem.
So first thing is to present effectively. Nowhere have I told you that your English has to be perfect. Right? Your English does not need to be perfect to present effectively. If you've had your script, if you know your content, even if your English or your accent or whatever is not at the quote unquote standard level, which again is something that randomly society puts on us, you can still do a good effective presentation. So please get rid of that mindset that my English is not good, so I won't be able to present it. No, that is not what presentation entails. Presentation entails logic, structuring your arguments properly, designing effective slides that are clutter free, just have bullet points that make a very specific idea clear to the audience, right? So those are the points that you need to be thinking about. Second point, so first point, as I've already said, English is not the only thing. There are so many other things that are more important. Second point, you have already told me that you haven't really done this before, right? You haven't really presented in a group of friends or to audience, to people before. So now would be the time to get started on practicing that, right? Even if you don't have a presentation for class or for anything else in your professional life, just start speaking to people, right? Just start making random funny presentations on funny topics, right? The idea is that you practice speaking to a group of people, and that really comes with practice. And if you start now and keep doing that over a period of time, you will definitely see improvement in terms of confidence and everything, right? Does that answer your question, Harshit?
Thank you very much, ma'am. I will do the thing you suggest me.
Right? And English language fluency is absolutely not essential for good presentations. Structure, logic, effectiveness, that's all, and confidence.
Sure, ma'am.
So any other questions, anyone else? If there are no questions, we can disperse.
Ma'am. Hello, ma'am.
Yes, Mr. Deepak. Yeah.
Will we given some assignment on the basis of this presentation?
Unfortunately, because we don't have a consistent sort of audience, the audience is very different every session. So there won't be a common assignment.
Yes.
But if you're interested, I can give you some prompts that in the next session, hopefully, that you can use to prepare on your own. And if you want, you can send, videos of your presentations to my email ID, and I can give them feedback. And my email ID is this. So please feel free to email me with any of your scripts or your audios or videos, presentations that I can give feedback about. I can't get back to everybody and that too immediately, but whenever I find the time, I promise you I will. Give you.
Ma'am, it is helpful if you given to us some topics to build up presentations.
Sure, I'll give you those prompts and topics in the next session, which is tomorrow.
Okay, ma'am.
Okay. So thank you, everybody. Thank you for your patience and for your cooperation. And have a wonderful rest of the day. See you.
Thank you, ma'am.